Hello and welcome to this special series of dialogue, Deeper Reforms, Better Opportunities. In the past decade, China supported an average economic growth of 6.6% per year, with a 3% annual increase in energy consumption. It reduced its carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP by more than 34% and its energy consumption per unit of GDP by over 26%, making it one of the fastest countries in the world to reduce energy intensity. How has China achieved the balance of environmental protection and economic growth? What has China done in green technologies to fight climate change? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo.
In 2023, China's total installed renewable energy capacity reached 1.45 billion kilowatts. It accounts for over 50% of the country's total installed power generation capacity and more than 4.6 times the amount in 2012. In 2023, China's new energy investment grew by over 34% since the year before. Solar power investments exceeded $92 billion, and wind power investments surpassed $52 billion. In the realm of energy efficiency, from 2012 to 2023, China's energy consumption per unit of GDP decreased by almost 27%, and the productivity of major resources increased by over 60%. The share of renewables in China's total energy consumption increased from 15.5% in 2013 to 25.9% in 2023. Driven by the strong demand for green transformation, China's innovation and industrial strength have significantly improved. In 2014, China sold only 75,000 new energy vehicles. Less than a decade later, sales exceeded 9.4 million vehicles, leading to a domestic market share of almost 32%. China has made significant progress in reducing carbon emissions. From 2012 to 2023, China's carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP decreased by more than 35%.
Joining me today are Lauri Myllyvirta, Senior Fellow of Asia Society Policy Institute, Changhua, China Director at the Office of Jeremy Rifkin, Wang Yongzhong, Senior Fellow at the Institute for World Economics and Politics from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Anatole Boute, Professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Welcome to Dialogue. Changhua, I will start with you. For those who are not that familiar with the Chinese efforts to fight climate change and also dealing with the environmental protection issues, give us a brief introduction of how has China been doing over the past decade?
China definitely has been making a very, very strong case in terms of the very strong political will to transform its economy, particularly its energy structure, and of course, reindustrialization. And as the few numbers you cited or in the beginning, those are really the data and the evidence that really support the case. On one side, the political will is there, and the policymakers have been really moving forward in terms of policy incentives to drive the agenda to really deliver all the set targets around the energy intensity, around the carbon intensity, around the energy efficiency and the environmental protection, all green agendas there. China is now in the sort of final year and a half of the 14th five-year plan. If you look at the numbers of the targets we made for the 14th year plan, that has already covered, carbon intensity targets, energy intensity targets, and of course, really putting all the acts together in order to deliver peaking emissions before 2030. And this is a very important moment actually for China to review in terms of where we stand today, particularly look at the progress made and challenges remain. If you look at early this year, back in May, the government rolled out a 2024-2025 action plan with a particular focus to address those difficult to abate sectors. In China, we call high pollution, high carbon, emissions sort of sectors there, like steel making, petrochemical, chemical, non-ferrous metals, as well as building materials there, really making it the final move in terms of to really deliver, by the end of 2025, we'll be able to deliver, the 14th five-year plan in order to lay a solid foundation to deliver 2030 agenda.
So Lauri, there are two goals, 2030 to peak carbon dioxide emissions and also neutrality in 2060, as Changhua mentioned. Can China do it based on what we know, available information and also policies, efforts by the government and the society?
China's effort in the past few years has been a bit of a mixed bag in the sense that emissions have gone up. In fact, emissions growth has been faster than in the preceding years. So in that sense, it might seem that there isn't a whole lot of progress. But exactly as Changhua said, the foundation has been the foundation has been laid down. The growth in clean industries, in the manufacturing of solar panels, EVs, batteries, wind turbines, and the deployment of those technologies in China has accelerated in a very impressive way. And that can deliver the emission peak certainly before 2030. In fact, right now it looks like the emission peak could be happening faster than that. So if you look at how much clean energy was added last year into the grid, that amount is sufficient to cover the growth in electricity demand in China during a typical year. So that means that it can start to push down the consumption of fossil fuels and start to peak emissions now already if that scale of adding new clean energy is maintained.
Changhua, one of the key factors in terms of fossil fuel consumption, of course, is the coal use. Important UN agency on climate change says that if you want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, coal use must be slashed by 70% by 2030. But that's not enough. By 2050, we have to stop using coal entirely. With that in mind, how does China fit into that picture?
I probably would cite Professor's sort of a word mixed bag challenge for coal in China at this moment there. Coal has been a very important part of China's energy security. And if you look at availability, accessibility, affordability, that has been an important part of the fossil fuel, energy pillar for supporting rapid economic growth in China over the last few decades in particular. And China has set its ambition, and its targets there already, as we're talking about here today. So China has to deliver. And in that context there, in particular, we need to figure out how to address the puzzle of coal, which is a really challenging situation. On one side, China definitely has been making progress very impressively in terms of reducing reliance on coal, particularly if you look at the energy power generation sector. China now has about 36% of its power generation, electricity generation actually comes from non-fossil fuels already. And compared to a couple of decades ago, that has been a huge progress. Now, the challenging part actually is really around the social economic part. So yes, on one side, we do need to address climate change. We need to address the environmental challenges there. But in the meantime, we all know if somehow there is a lagging behind in terms of social economic solutions, particularly government policy, public budget financing, with all the society support there is no way we're going to be able to deliver at the accelerated desire for the transition there. We need to address the social security issue. We need to address rescaling, upscaling issues there. We need to address, people's safety net there as well. So it's a complicated, really mixed bag challenge. I hope somehow people will really understand the challenges China is facing at this moment, or is making a huge effort to address.
Well, of course, one important area is this industrial transformation. Yongzhong, if you look at these numbers, for example, a report by the International Energy Agency, in 2023, here I quote, global renewable energy installation increased 510 million kilowatts, with China contributing more than half of that capacity. In 2022, China's renewable energy generation effectively reduced its domestic carbon dioxide emissions by approximately 2.26 billion tons. What does it say about China's efforts, for transformation, for green development in the industrial sector?
In the perspective of the Chinese industrial transformation and green development, I think that China has also have faced the challenge and also opportunities. So for that China is a wood factory, and also the manufacturer is the very important, maybe the most important sectors in China. Also, where our share in the world in the manufacture output is around 30%. So this means that Chinese industry is carbon intensive. Yeah, so we need to have depends on the coal consumption, and also we need the energy consumption. So this is the national condition for China. So for the opportunity now is that China for the renewable energy sectors. So for the data we can show that if for the renewable manufacture, we can see that China has established a very complete and also have the advanced the industrial chains from the critical mineral processing and the polysilicon and the silicon wafers, cells, and modules, and also EV. So this is a complete the industry. So this is I think the opportunity. At the same time, we have also seen the challenges. So that China will have the Chinese norm based on the manufacturing sectors.
Yes.
So compared to Western countries.
As Yongzhong mentioned, Anatole, it's a complicated picture, right? On one hand, you have large capacity, renewable energy, but at the same time, the consumption of energy, including this fossil fuel, is massive. How does the Chinese government, on the macro policy level, coordinate, the different needs, the different efforts? For example, on one hand, you need economic growth for people. Some people would say the priority is the growth, economic expansion. Others would say, it's a sustainability. That's the priority. That should be the priority. So what's your observation?
Yes, as the important development, I think, is the significant decrease in the cost of renewable energy generation over the last decade, and China has played a major contribution to that. So thanks to that reduction in the cost of renewable energy, today I don't think it's no longer a choice of affordability versus renewables. Renewables are now part of affordable energy supply, secure energy supply. And so massively promoting renewables can help economic growth, can help essentially also affordability, reducing dependence on fossil fuels, achieving climate targets. So all essentially now in a mutually reinforcing way. And it's important to achieve that, these synergies. It's important to implement market reforms. China is engaged in electricity market reforms, in reinforcing, strengthening the emissions trading scheme. It's now important to align both mechanisms to send the right signal to the market, both to add capacity in a more cost-effective way, but also to reduce the share or the production of coal and eventually also stop new investments. I think if you look at it from a more broader perspective, all these measures are contributing to economic growth. We see that as China is a leader in installing, deploying renewable energy capacity, but also in the manufacturing and the export. So clearly, I don't think these things are opposed to each other anymore. It's clearly now part of one economic picture, a green economy, versus the traditional fossil fuel-based approach. And of course, significant efforts still have to be made to fully decarbonize. But in terms of paradigm, I think what China has shown is that it's possible to grow and grow in a green way. But now it's, of course, essential to push out coal from the market. And this could be achieved in a cost-effective way through ambitious market reforms. And I think that's a direction China is taking.
Well, Lauri, more on the policy front, of course, there are different policies, a variety of policies, I would say. For example, emissions trading scheme in China, and a clean energy basis, whole country PV program, green electricity trading, and energy consumption control. How do these policies, play in the government's toolbox to achieve, these dual goals in 2030, 2060?
I would point to the clean energy basis and the whole county solar as the most impressive and impactful policies of the past few years. They're really the policies that have driven the record installations of new wind and solar. So clean energy bases are vast, centralized developments, especially in the northern and western parts of the country, but also, for example, offshore wind. Where the government enables and facilitates very large scale development, and whole county solar is a model that could be adapted in a lot of other countries as well, where local governments facilitate the rollout of distributed solar in a county in a way that drives down costs and makes it easier to roll out the technology very fast. So those kinds of targeted policies have been essential, and also, of course, the policies that have enabled very rapid growth of clean tech manufacturing, which has been a major contributor to economic growth and has, of course, enabled the rapid deployment of the clean technologies as well. China has started to introduce market-driven policies. So, of course, internationally, the emissions trading scheme is the one that gets the most attention because it has been the standard recommendation from economists and so on. China's regulators have used a multitude of ways to create demand for green energy, so incentivize large users of electricity to purchase green energy, and that has been very important. But the policy approach is much more targeted, focused on promoting different sectors and different technologies, rather than creating a carbon market and letting that handle everything. So it's really important to pay attention to the other policies.
Yeah, Lauri, you mentioned about the clean energy basis and whole country PV program more impactful. Is that a top-down approach, and how is it received? By this is the market or by the government at the local levels?
I wouldn't call it necessarily top-down at least not in the way that it would be wholly driven by the central government. So these are projects where there's very strong enthusiasm from the provincial level government and governments and local, so city level governments, because these are policies that directly create investment, create economic activity in their provinces. They also enable industrial growth, because China's provinces have to meet targets for limiting energy intensity and for consuming a certain percentage of energy from clean sources. And so the more clean energy you have locally, the more you can increase industrial production. So this is one key incentive that has been created. But so there's very strong enthusiasm.
And of course, it is a comprehensive effort, Changhua. China has been basically doing in every aspect. In some areas, it's kind of almost like a unique, I would say, forestation. And also, China is the first country to realize zero net land degradation. It's desertified and sandified areas are both shrinking. Basically that contributed a lot to the global efforts actually to realize a certain goal in 2030. What has led China, to be able to do that? How much a role that plays in terms of this reaching the 2030, 2060 goals?
Well, if we say political will is the starting point, and then policy incentives and actions definitely should follow, including investments, societal activities. Everyone should be in it. Besides the renewable energy, really the great stories we've been talking about here today already. Another side of China's leadership and achievement is really about nature. It's about the ecosystems. Put that in the context of global context, actually, in terms of global biodiversity, that we have a convention. We also have the combating land desertification convention. Of course, on top of that, we also have climate change convention there as well. So globally, I think there has been a general awakening in the last 3 or 4 decades there in terms of really the challenge of the environment, environmental challenges, and we need to address, because without that, that step forward, actually wouldn't be able to achieve the desired sustainability goals and the targets there at all. So China definitely has been making the case, making a very, very strong case. If you look at China's current national plan, China has put its land and ocean, of course, there as well. Now we're talking about the land. The land ecosystems, they're very diverse. China is a large country, but like all the rest of the large economies there, we've been facing desertification. But China has adopted the convention to combat desertification, and as well as biodiversity convention there as well. And so really putting national targets, policy incentives together to do so. A couple of numbers to look at that. Today, China's green forest coverage has already reached 24.1%, right on its track to deliver not only the 2025 agenda target, but also on its track to deliver at least 26% by 2030. So this kind of leadership is key in terms of making a strong case that when you have a strong political will, when your policymakers actually put their heads and hands together and really getting the business community, the whole society together, changes could happen.
We are seeing similar efforts in different parts of the world. Anatole, if you look at the European Union, for example, it has raised its own climate ambition, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. It puts a fair price on the carbon emitted during this production of carbon-intensive goods that are entering the EU. Basically, in terms of trade, for some factories, for some businesses, they have to pay extra if they produce, say, if there are emissions of carbon dioxide. You have focused intensively on CBAM in your research. What kind of potential impact that may have on the Chinese side?
The objective of CBAM is to avoid or limit the problem of carbon leakage. That means that European companies would relocate abroad or would increase their imports of carbon-intensive products produced in countries that don't have the same level of climate change mitigation ambition. Now, this has the objective of ensuring the integrity of the EU climate policy. Also aims to protect the industry. Now, at the same time, it sends a signal. It sends a signal to the European partners that they should do something about reflecting the cost of climate change in the price or the cost of their products. So China has already opted for an emissions trading scheme. So that's clearly provides an important basis for cooperation between the European Union and China. Now, the next step with CBAM would be for China to gradually increase the price of carbon, eventually to align it with the European prices. Now, that may seem quite ambitious because there's still a very significant difference in carbon prices in the EU and in China. But if China wants to decarbonize, and I think most economic analysts would agree that more ambitious carbon prices, higher carbon prices would be necessary. So the CBAM could help China, incentivize China to do so. I believe this should be done based on cooperation, based on dialogue. This dialogue is existing. There is cooperation between China and the EU on emissions trading. Now, this should not include CBAM and try to cooperate on that level too. From China's perspective, it's important to gradually raise the carbon price so as to keep these revenues within China and then reinvest these revenues in decarbonization measures instead of essentially giving or having the European Union levying a tax on these Chinese products. So I think China has much to gain, and the EU also would have much to gain in cooperating with China on this very important point.
It's just really about how to, deal with that kind of situation. On one side is a challenge, but on the other side, it could be incentive to push for more renewable energy. Lauri, China will soon need to submit its 2035 climate targets to the UN, alongside updates to its pre-existing 2030 targets. What do you think we can expect from these new and updated UN targets?
In one way, I do have my hopes quite high, because if you look at the two previous times that China has updated its climate commitments, before the Paris Agreement together with President Obama in 2014, and then in the run-up to the Glasgow Climate Conference in 2020, China did manage to strike a balance between being realistic and being ambitious enough to actually inspire the whole global community. So I think in both cases, those commitments did pave the way for successful global negotiations. This time, this impressive growth in clean energy that we've seen would enable ambitious targets. I'm not going to make guesses as to what we're going to see, but I'm going to say that, of course, for China's effort, having targets that firmly set the country on the path towards carbon neutrality is important. These are the first targets for 2035. These are the first targets to be met after the country's emission peak. So it really shows what kind of pathway the policymakers intend to follow from the peak to carbon neutrality. And that's super important because it's the total amount of emissions that China releases over the next decades that determines China's contribution to warming up the climate, and also, of course, for the credibility of China's targets, because if you can say that you are making consistent progress towards that carbon neutrality, then that really shows the seriousness of the targets. And of course, for the development of China's clean energy industries, having targets that make it clear that those industries are there to stay and to grow would be important. So the stakes are very high, and this is something that a lot of people will be following very closely.
Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.